Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's the Addams Family, brought to us by Ocean. Coming out originally to coincide with the Addams Family movie of the early 90s, in the game you're playing as Gomez Addams, and your goal is to save all the members of the Addams family, including of course your wife Morticia as the final Addams Family member you're able to save. And while the game is a relatively typical platformer, it's always been a personal favorite of mine. So here we go with the Addams Family for the Super Nintendo. When you start the game, you can either go right into it or put in the password to pick up from where you left off previously. When you make it to certain key moments of the game, you'll earn a new password that you can then put in and pick up from where, of course, you left off. In the game, you're playing as Gomez, exploring the Addams Family mansion to find all the members of the family who have been held captive by various creatures. When you get into the mansion for the first time, heading to the left and going through a hidden door will take you to a series of secret special rooms that have a large portion of the game's items that kind of give you an instant boost to your money count, extra lives, and even the power-ups of the game. From that point on, after exiting out, we're going to go up to the door on the next level on the left side and head out to the old tree. Now, we're not going to go in the old tree. Instead, head up to the very top where you will fight this boss of a bird. He's a relatively easy fight, especially this early on, but you have to be still careful because you have low health, only having 2 hits before you lose a life. All the bosses in the game are easily taken care of by jumping on their head in pretty typical platform fare, but they usually can put up a little bit of a challenge if you don't time your jumps and movements correctly. The bird works as a great way of kind of getting used to the jumping and the way the bosses are going to be handled throughout the course of the game. For defeating him, though, you get an extra heart container. You can get a total of 3 extra heart containers for a total of 5 hearts, and that's what we're going to start off by doing. Now, these hearts are completely optional. You do not have to go and get these extra hearts, but they are highly recommended by me, mostly because while this game is a pretty fun platformer, it does have a bit of stuff you gotta get used to as far as the controls. It's far from perfect, a little bit slippery at times, and it's extremely easy to accidentally jump into an enemy or mistime your jump and end up getting clipped by one of them. A lot of the game will be you jumping on the enemy's heads and kind of bouncing off of them. You can even do this sometimes to get above onto certain platforms or getting little hidden bonus areas and the like. There is a good amount of hearts spread throughout, and there is a lot of extra lives as well for you to gather. When you do end up dying, you get a little screen, and then it goes back and you are where you were in that area. If you run out of all your lives, you'll then go to the game over screen where it will kick you back out to the beginning of the Addams Family mansion. So that's really the only penalty. So if you build up enough lives, you should be able to get through most of the areas of the game. The area that we're in now, which is the freezer area, basically, just a lot of ice, and it's pretty difficult, especially early on, to go right here because of the slippery platforms, but this will eventually lead us to a boss that will give us our next heart container. So like I said, definitely a good way to start. You'll notice that there is the life and the money count in the lower left corner. Earning 100 money will earn you an extra life, similar to how coins would or rings would in other platformers, as well as if you earn a certain amount of money, you also get little bonus hearts for your health replenishment as well from time to time. While the game is relatively straightforward when it comes to most of the areas of the game, there are plenty of other little entrances and other doors and other paths you can take to find little bonus items, little bonus nooks that are hidden away in the game, and sometimes shortcuts even to help you get through the mansion a little bit quicker. While your health is represented by the heart meter on the left side, there are a couple other items that you pick up that basically work as an extra hit, and when you end up getting hit, you lose that ability, but you don't end up taking damage, such as the fencing rapier, which allows you to attack enemies and defeat most of them in the game. There's also the rock or marble or pebble that you can throw out that will bounce a little bit and also take out any enemy that it runs into. It's one of the more effective weapons, but it doesn't appear all that often throughout the course of the game's levels. There's also the speed shoes, which will of course speed you up, allowing you to run pretty fast, which already makes the slippery controls even more slippery, but it can definitely speed up some areas. Depending upon where you end up getting them will be more or less effective as I pick them up here, but unfortunately, by mistiming the jump, I end up immediately losing them by hitting the spikes. But as you saw, I didn't end up losing any health from that. There's also the whirly cap that you can get, which will allow you to fly for a period of time by pressing the jump button. While this can be useful in a few areas, and a couple areas is almost necessary in order to get through them, it doesn't appear all that often. It doesn't count as any of the other normal items, such as when you get hit while wearing it, you don't instantly go and lose it. Instead, you just take normal damage, and then after a period of time, then it ends up disappearing. Here we go with the second boss of the game. This is the snowman, as its title at the top. I do like that part about the game, as every room has a unique name to it, so if you were trying to make a map or figure out where things lead to, it's very easy to do so. The snowman is an extremely easy boss. He rolls back and forth in his snowball form, stopping and then throwing snowballs at you, giving you plenty of opportunities to easily jump on his head to defeat him. Once he is taken care of, you'll get another one of the heart containers, and then when we come back out, we'll be back in the pantry. From where we first entered the kitchen area, this door here, if we go to the right, we're going to go to the furnace, into the fiery area of the game, which is where the location of Granny is. But instead of doing that now, we're instead going to go to the conservatory, work our way through and get the last heart container, and then actually go after other members of the family before eventually returning into that pantry. Like I said, there are a few different shortcuts and other little areas you can explore, usually containing some extra money and some extra bonus items. The path I'm taking isn't necessarily the absolute quickest by any means. I'm not going to claim that my route is exactly perfect, as there are a bunch of little branching things and some extra shortcuts that I don't end up taking along my particular path, but this will definitely be a pretty easy route to follow in order to help you get through the game if you've ever wanted to try it out. One of the other main gimmicks of the game is the on-off switches. They come in a few different forms, but they're in many areas of the game, and basically by turning it on or off, other walls will appear or disappear or change the direction they're going, allowing you to get to certain areas. Right here, we're going to bounce off this fly enemy and head into this door up here, and this will take us to the wormy way, allowing us to continue through this area. The game has a lot of enemies, usually contained on screen, and for the most part it doesn't really slow down or hinder it by any means, but it's pretty impressive just the amount of enemies that end up being on screen all at one time. A lot of times you'll come to those exploding bombs or tomatoes, and since they don't start kind of ticking down until they activate, you usually have enough time to get past them and kind of run on past. When you make it here, you're going to have to use the ropes. Moving up and down the ropes, while easy, you have to kind of time it, being on the edge of the rope and then making short little jumps. Of course, holding down the jump button longer will make you jump higher up into the air when doing so, so you have to kind of time it so that you'll be able to get past. Now, the centipedes, this boss, is one of the toughest as far as the ones we get for the heart containers, which is why I end up completing this one last. You have 3 of the centipedes. It doesn't matter which one you end up landing on, because it will do damage to their health meter on the far right side, but since they're all moving around pretty quickly, it can be a bit difficult to establish where you need to jump on them and actually do that damage. Once they're defeated, you will get another one of the heart power-ups, and now we have a full set of health. Now, one trick in the game to help you kind of get through things a bit quicker, well, every time you defeat a boss or complete an area, there's a door that usually takes you back a little bit to help you get back to the main hallway of the Addams Family mansion, but by actually doing a little kind of save and quit real quick by hitting the select button and then hitting quit from there, will actually take you to the game over screen, technically counting as a game over, I guess, but you don't end up losing any health or any of the extra lives you currently have. It just kind of works as a warp to kind of get you back to the Addams Family Mansion's main hallway so that you can continue on easily without having to go through a lot of the same rooms you may have already traveled through. Now it's time to actually start hunting down the members of the Addams family, and the first one we're going to go after is Pugsley by heading into the toy room, or the toy chamber. Now this is kind of a series of torture chamber-esque rooms with swinging pendulums and giant guillotines and even executioner maxed enemies that end up throwing axes out at you. There's a lot going on here, but this is a relatively simple area in comparison to some of the other ones. There's a lot of these cannonballs you can bounce off of in order to get over and across areas. There's a lot of times in the game later on where you'll have to do this, so you can practice a little bit as far as that timing is concerned with the cannons to kind of get that timing down now before you make it a little bit farther in. This area is mostly straightforward. You may have noticed I took one little kind of shortcut by going through the one room and going through kind of a hidden wall, just like I'm going to do here. Both of these rooms end up taking you to a little bit farther into these areas. Go through the right door here, and this will take you to the room known as the playroom. There's a lot of rotating blades, as you can see. Try to do your best to maintain that health. Activate the bombs from a distance before kind of heading over to the right here, just because there's so much spinning and going around. You're more than likely going to end up getting hit if you're trying to just go straight like I normally would with those bombs exploding. Over here is the next boss, which is the wacky scientist, though it's weird that he's the wacky scientist because he's like an executioner. Basically, he kind of moves up and down, and as you can see, the blades rotate around them, and then after they stop, they then kind of do a spread shot outwards. This kind of repeats over and over again, but usually has at least one opening on him that you'll be able to jump on his head in order to do damage. Once he's been defeated, you will save Pugsley, and now you can move on to the next area. I recommend going down the little pipe where Pugsley was located. You'll kind of find a little bonus area that has a bunch of extra little money in it. You may be able to get some of your hearts back and some of the other stuff before heading back. Thankfully, when you go through the door right there in that same room, it takes you instantly back to the hall stairs, so you don't have to do the save and quit thing here. Now, next up, we're going to head back out to the old tree, but instead of climbing up like we did last time, we're now actually going to head inside of the old tree and start making our way through here. In this first room, there's a lot of these rotating skulls as you work your way down the mounds of grass and such, trying to get farther down. If you go down here, you will find one of those spinning whirlybird-like caps that you can then use to allow Gomez to fly around, allowing us to kind of get through a couple of these platforms. Go up just a little bit, and then right here you want to go underneath, watching out for the rabbit, and then you can fly up to the top portion of the screen here. Once you make it over to that far right side, you can head through this bottom little corner, and it'll take you to the next area, which is known as the under graveyard, as we continue to make it through. One of the reasons I do like that whirly cap is not only does it allow you for better maneuverability, it does allow you to kind of like float right above a lot of the enemies. You can kind of easily like skip over their heads as you're bouncing through. One thing that I found funny about the Addams Family games, they were released on multiple home consoles, but there was many different versions. The NES version, known as just Addams Family, has a completely different setup and layout to like the house. While it's a similar game in some regards, it has a very different setup, whereas PUGSLEY'S Scavenger Hunt for the NES actually uses almost an identical setup to this game as far as the areas and the level design. Though the goal in this one and the original Addams Family NES game remains the same. Boss ends up changing up, as well as a few other things, whereas Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt, you're doing pretty much what you're doing in this game, except you end up having Pugsley as your main character, and end up having to actually save Gomez at one point, though the boss ends up being the same in that one as it ends up being in this one. After making it into the mausoleum, we start heading through kind of the hellacious area. This is one of the more dark areas. Even though it's kind of fire-themed, there's another fire-themed area we'll be doing a little bit later on. And this is actually where Wednesday is currently hiding out. I'd recommend definitely picking up the rapier just a little bit before that hallway, just so you can easily take out the enemies as you're moving through smaller corridors. Unable to be able to jump out of the way will just either allow you to end up taking hits, and in which case I just recommend running through quickly and just use those invincibility frames to your advantage. This whole room right here is a bit annoying, that is for sure, because there's a couple of different kind of ways you get through this, and if you don't end up hitting the switch properly, which I ended up making a mistake and forgot there's actually a switch in this room, all the way down here that you need to hit, and then you can start heading over. The game features a decent amount of little edge jumping areas like this one, where you have to be on that like really edge of a platform and then jump up to an upper one. It's a pretty big staple of a lot of platformers, and it's not perfect in this one. I won't say it's the worst, but the timing on it is pretty particular when trying to get through these areas. Coming up to the next room, the stone steps. There's some more of those giant thwomp-like giant rock boulder pointy things that kind of come down. They have an interesting design, I will say, to them, and I think this whole area in general has a very interesting design. While of course there was always the horror themes and everything with Addams Family, it wasn't necessarily always like the really dark stuff, at least not that I remember. There's some pretty ghoulish and hellacious stuff kind of going on as far as the design of this area in particular is, though I still very much like it. This area is a bit tough, waiting for those right opportunities, along with a cannon blaster on the other side trying to fire at you. The fish cannons, as they are called by one of the names of one of the areas of the game. The timing on trying to avoid the cannonballs, you have that few seconds once they first come on the screen to kind of get past before they start firing out, so you have to kind of move quickly a lot. Next up is the crazy crypt. We're going to head up here, and then what you have to do is kind of bounce off of one of these skulls up into the upper corner. You can take the other way around, but it's easier just to do that real quick, especially with 2 skulls, so you have 2 chances to do it. While I still have the speed shoes, I'm going to use this to go down here and hit this switch, and then have to bounce off one of the cannonballs to get up to the upper platform and continue over. Like I mentioned, the one area is called the firing fish, which is represented by the fish cannons that are everywhere, which is just a weird kind of design and setup for the most part. Either way, pretty straightforward area for you to kind of run your way through. You do have to kind of duck here with this platform, kind of get pushed by it while crouching, and then be able to jump on it on the opposite side. This area, bouncing off the cannonballs, you can easily get up to the switches above. You only need to hit a couple of them in order to get through, unless you forgot something and need to run backwards for whatever reason. Other than that, you only have to hit those first 2. The Chamber of Walls is similar to one of the areas we just did a little bit ago, where you have a bunch of the switches and a few little edge platform jumps that you're going to have to do, hitting the on and off switches over and over again in order to kind of manipulate your way through, though it's still pretty straightforward. Run through, hit a switch, then go through with the area that was previously blocked off. A few seconds later, you'll have another switch, and then repeat until you're finally able to kind of get through. Over here, bounce off another one of the cannonballs in order to hit this switch, and then do a nice little running jump up, bounce off another cannonball. Be ready to either get hit or kind of time it so you're able to get past that cannonball, though the timing is pretty precise. I usually end up getting hit there unless I actually have been able to maintain the rapier, which is definitely difficult in this game to not end up getting hit through areas. The window for getting through this area is another one that's pretty tight because of just these things kind of crushing down and trying to hit you as they fall, so be careful when running on through them. Over here, you're going to ride the moving platform across that fire, and then more firing cannons. There's just a lot going on here, as you can see, and that's one of the reasons I like this game as a platformer so much, is while it has definitely some good challenge, there's just so much going on, and there's a lot of stuff to bounce off of for some overall pretty cool things. Now here we go with the next boss, which is the Ghastly Goblin. He moves around and he stops at multiple locations, and this allows you to hit a lot of damage on him really quickly. Unfortunately, he ends up delivering a couple of hits to me here, so I end up losing my power-ups. But either way, he'll then go on the top portion, which is the only kind of time where you have to wait for him to kind of come back around. But either way, once he ends up dropping, you save Wednesday, and now we can move on to the next area. Here I'm going to do another one of those save and quits to help me get back to the main staircase. Once we are back in that hall upstairs, we're going to head up to the right and do the upper right door, which takes us back to the kitchen, and now it's time to go to the fiery area of the game. Yeah, I know the area we just did was pretty fiery as well, but this is kind of like the other side of the kitchen. One side was the freezer, and the other side is the stove. Over here, you have to first start off by climbing up a couple of series of platforms. I do really like the monkey enemy in the teacup. I think that's one of the more interesting sprites in the game. A lot of the sprites are just completely goofy, and the designer did a great job at establishing so many different looking enemies for this platformer. Once you hit that thing, though, you work back over to where the stove is and actually head inside, and you'll now be in the furnace. The hardest thing about this area is you have enemies here who cannot be defeated by jumping on them. These guys are everywhere in this area, so you have to really be careful when it comes to not accidentally jumping on top of them. Now, if you do have one of the weapons in the game, the rapier or the throwable item, you can take these guys out with that, but outside of that, you kind of just either have to avoid them or just suck it up, take a hit, and then keep on running through if you're being a little bit more impatient. There's also plenty of bouncing little flames here and there to kind of end up heating your progress, as I end up making just a tiny mistake and end up remembering I need to have that on as I make it through and continue through this area. There's also plenty of little like broken pipes and all that are just spewing flames out of them and rotating fire as well. Right over here, go down to the little bottom, make sure you pick up this heart, because you'll probably get hit once or twice before you've already gotten to this area, just because of how difficult it can be initially to kind of get used to the way the enemies kind of work and just how much is going on, especially during the grill here at the beginning. Now here you have to drop down, hit the switch, then jump back up to this moving platform, and this will allow you to kind of get up here, and by hitting it, well, you can come up here initially, these little blocks right here, these ones right here, won't actually be here unless you've gone through and hit that switch, so that's why we had to do that. Then you have to climb up, hit another switch, and that opens up the entrance to the right that takes you to the area known as the oven. Once in here, walk across the top. There's another one of the on-off switches. Wait for the fire to kind of bounce up and down, and then be sure to hit it. Next one, you can just kind of keep running on past. Time it so that you're able to land on the moving block as it's coming back around. It's a little bit hard to time it, but you have a pretty good window. The flame doesn't end up hurting you exactly when you end up kind of hitting the very top of it. The hitbox for it's a little bit farther down, allowing you a little bit of leeway when it comes to landing on the boxes as they're moving through the flame. And the other great thing about the game is it's not instant death from spikes or fire or other hazards like that. You just end up losing a single heart or lose one of the items, whatever you were carrying at that moment. So that's a big plus as far as the damage goes in the game. Right over here, I'm going to grab this heart, then come back. This way I can kind of hit this in case I ended up getting hit during this kind of small little area with these guys. I wouldn't have ended up losing a life there. Once that's been hit and taken care of, continue along the top portion, back over to the far right now that we have the opening there, and we can get on through to Just Toast. Work your way all the way to the right and then down, and it'll kind of loop back around to the left, doing the same, and then you'll drop once again and start heading back over to the right. There's little fiery pools as well as more of those jumping guys and the flaming enemies as well. Pretty much everything we've already seen. So actually a pretty easy room as far as this area is concerned. Next area, there's a bunch of really big kind of moving sparks there, and then you'll have a series of these blocks that end up getting kind of locked in. Initially, they're not there, but they kind of get locked in on these moving tracks, and you have to time your jumps correctly so that you'll be able to get through. And the same goes for right after that with here. Jump across them so that you'll be able to make it, and then go through a couple of little tiny jumps and more jumping flames and the like. Be careful, because some of the blocks you end up jumping on will immediately fall when you land on them, so you have to time it so that you'll get across, of course, without accidentally falling into the lava below. Now, the next area, stir fry, wait for this platform to kind of move around, then jump to it, or jump into the little crevice, either way, or you can duck on in here. Either way, what you're going to be doing here is jumping down, and then using that in order to hit the on-off switch. It's the only way you're able to do it. Even though it kind of looks like you may be able to get to that edge and jump up to the platform, every time I've ever attempted it, I never kind of get a jump going. I just end up falling. The next little area right here is a lot of stuff going on. It's hard to kind of get through here without taking any damage as we try to hit the on-off switch located on that left wall there. Once we're finally able to hit it, though, we can kind of go back and then go through this entrance to the area known as the River of Lava. This is one of the areas of the game that pretty much requires the whirly hat, so be sure to grab it right away and then start flying your way through. It can actually be used to destroy some little barriers like these ones right here, allowing us to get up into that little extra chamber that has a lot of hearts to replenish all the ones we've been losing throughout the course of the fire area. You may end up getting hit through more areas, there's more to grab. If you end up losing the hat, of course, you're going to fall down in the lava. You're not instantly dead, but you'll have to move quickly if you're going to want to try to get through, though I'm not sure if there's a ways to really kind of jump back up because of how high everything is set. So you may at that point be a little bit in trouble, depending upon the area that you ended up falling in the lava, that is. You can grab another hat and then make your way through, and then into the next room, immediately hit the on-off switch. You can fly on up or jump on up, and then you're going to move over to the right and hit another one of the on-off switch, allowing this platform to appear here. Wait right here for a few moments until this guy kind of walks by and ends up falling down before attempting to start climbing your way up. As you noticed, of course, there's another one of the on-off switches, and of course the bridge down below ends up reforming that we just got rid of a few moments ago. Jump up here, you can ignore the one over to the left and just hit this on-off switch, allowing you to fall down and move into the next room, which is known as the last oven. You can probably guess this is the last room of this area, and thankfully, because this is a pretty challenging area to get through, and why I wanted to wait a little bit into the game before attempting it. Especially, you want to make sure you get those first few heart containers before attempting to go through this big area. Over here, once again, you need to do a duck so that you're able to get under. You can then jump up to this one as it's moving back and forth, and then continue along the path this way. Wait for the right moment, and then kind of get up here, duck underneath, and as the block is circling back around, as you can tell, you can jump on it in order to get over. Use the spring in the middle of the lava to bounce your way over, hitting another on-off switch a few moments later to make this bridge appear, which will allow you to make another big leap and allow you not to fall down into that fiery lava. For the boss, it is the Fire Dragon, which is one of the more unique bosses here. He has two little fire pits he kind of pops out of and then moves around the room in a few different formations. Your goal, like all the bosses, is jump on his head in order to do damage. It can be tricky at times because of the fiery spears, but more because of the body mass he has. Landing the jumps directly on top of him can be a bit challenging just because of his patterns and the way he moves. But once he is defeated, you'll save Granny, and now it's time to do another little save and quit, allowing us to get back to the Hall of Stairs. Now, we only have one more family member to save before we can go and save Morticia, and that, of course, is Uncle Fester. In order to save Fester, we're going to go to the Portrait Gallery, which is a large series of rooms with all these portraits of the various members of the Addams family, and it's a easier area, at least in my opinion, much easier area than the one that we just did. One of the enemies I love, though, in this area is the knights that are riding like ostrich-like guys. They kind of look like the classic arcade Joust characters. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, that always was something I ended up liking as far as those enemies were concerned. While there was nothing particularly amazing about this game, it was one of those ones I kept coming back to. I rented it a few times, usually on weekends where I couldn't find anything else on the store shelves at Blockbuster, and I was like, well, I like the Addams Family, and I was able to usually complete it every time I ended up renting it, especially with the help of the continue system and being able to pick up kind of where you left off. It wasn't really that strict continue system that a lot of platformers ended up having. In this room, of course, I picked up another one of the rapiers, and I'm using that to help me fight a little bit of the guys. As you've probably noticed, it really isn't that challenging of an area. Here is probably one of the tougher spots, as you have to duck, quickly jump, and then duck again. If you don't get on the edge of the square there, you won't be able to stand back up after ducking underneath the kind of like pillar in the middle, which is a bit annoying, but overall, still only maybe like one or two extra little rotations of it going back and forth, and you should be able to kind of get through. Next up is the Hall of Clocks here. Watch out for more of the kind of like very stereotypical ghosts kind of moving up and down, which is kind of a real contrast from like that kind of like demon area that we were in earlier on in the game, and then here is just like the very kid-friendly, cartoony ghost kind of just moving up and down. Such a weird variety of enemies, but like I said earlier, I really do like overall most of the enemies that you get to jump on and battle throughout the course of this game. Be careful of the giant guillotines while moving through this area. Of course, they'll come crashing down. The blade is pretty big, has a nice big hit radius, so it's a bit hard to kind of dodge and very easily to accidentally jump in. Up here, you're going to have to hit the block and then kind of jump up. I'm going to use the ghost here to propel myself in order to hit it. If you end up missing that jump, you'll end up hitting the spikes. As long as you have more than one heart, though, or have one of the other items, you should be okay. In fact, they even give you another rapier, like, right afterwards, so you can replace the one you may lose if you ended up missing that kind of jump and hitting those spikes below. Keep running across. You can bounce easily along the springs and head on in to that next room. As you can see, it's called Fly, 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 and not only are there fly enemies, there are also the whirly hats for you to then kind of use and fly your way through, and you'll need this to kind of be able to get through a lot of the platforming in this area as you fly between the large seas of spikes everywhere, as well as giant squares with spikes on them that you'll have to fly in between them as well in order to kind of get past. Be careful of a few of the bombs here, but if you keep kind of just moving, you should be able to get past the bombs before they even end up exploding. The next room is the lower gallery, and it's kind of more of the same of what we've been dealing with as far as this area is concerned. You can bounce off of the projectiles from the bear rug or whatever it is and move yourself up so you don't have to worry about even any of the switches there. Right afterwards is another little area with a bunch of the giant swinging mace balls, a nicely timed jump in between the middle area. You should be able to kind of get your way through before any of them come crashing back into you. Grab the rapier floating over the spike pit here, and then use that to battle a couple of the enemies. After going through a few of these, you'll have to kind of get up to this platform here, time it, and then do a running jump. If you try to do the running jump from the top, you'll end up hitting your head on the ceiling, and if you do it from the bottom two platforms, you'll end up just coming up a bit short. Right after that, we finally get a little bit of a change of scenery as we enter into the library. There's a whole lot of books in the background that all have kind of differing themes, which is always a little fun read while you're running through this area. At this point, we're only a couple of rooms away from finally being able to save Uncle Fester. Another big room filled with more books in the background. You can kind of just float overhead. Though, if you do take the top approach, you will be able to get a hold of the projectile weapon that you can then use to kind of roll and bounce at a few of the enemies while you're going through here. Next up is the train room, which is actually the final room before the boss here in this area of the game. There's a lot of these rotating, like, spike gear type things. You can easily jump in between them, jump over them, and even stand on, like, the smokestack on the front of the train in order to kind of just get past a lot of them. Like, right here, you can kind of just stand here, duck, you'll avoid the one on top, and avoid the one at the very bottom here. As you're continuing along on the train, there comes the time where all these gears are going to be flying towards you. Thankfully, they give you plenty of hearts when you finally do make it to the end, and then it's time to battle the boss, the witch. Now, this witch is a little bit challenging at first because you can't easily jump on top of her head. You have to actually bounce off of Fester and then bounce off of him in order to get up high enough in order to land on her. Just some nicely little timed jumps, and you should have no problem being able to deliver damage to the witch and save Fester, and then we can move on to the final area to save Morticia. Once back into the main hall, head into the center door, and you'll go to a room with Lurch, Thing, and all the other members of the family we've saved. Music will play, and eventually the door on the right side, or the wall, will disappear, and we'll be able to go on to the final area of the game. Now, first up is the chain room. Here we're going to jump to this big long chain in the middle and then work our way over to the right and enter inside this door. Now, even though this room says don't go down, that's exactly what we're going to do, as you want to head down, and you'll be in a room called the Piranha Tank. Quickly swim on through, trying to do your best to avoid the piranhas, though swimming is not necessarily this game's strongest suit, that is for sure. Once you're able to get out of the top of it, you'll be in another room called the Amazing Chains, which is a little bit difficult to kind of maneuver around as you got to get through spikes and trying to make it from chain to chain. But head over to the left here, be sure to hit the switch, and then move on back to the right. This will allow you to get up to these chains up here, allowing you to continue on and get to this upper door. Be sure to jump right before that door, because there is a pit you can fall down that's hidden behind like the blocks and wall and all, and you'll fall through the floor if you're not careful. And back in the Hall of Chains, head over to the right here, be a nice little jump into this kind of in-between gap of all the spikes and enter into that room. The following room is another one where you're going to drop on down into another room called the Chain of Coins. Here you can move back and forth collecting a whole bunch of bills and money, and then you want to go through the right door. This will take you into the next segment, the kind of the final area really of the game, and this is called the caves. You have a few different types of enemies here, and it's kind of like the last bit of the normal kind of platforming and the way that things have been set up throughout most of the game before we reach that finale and that final boss. In the next area called Down Deeper, you're going to be heading, well, down, moving from side to side as you're working your way from platform to platform. There's a lot of flies kind of buzzing around, moving up and down, left and right, but it's pretty easy to kind of work your way through and down to the next door. Next up is the Catacombs. It has a bunch of rotating guys right near the very beginning. You'll see a door directly above you, but you're not going to go through that. Instead, you're going to head to the right. Just walk across, don't jump, because sometimes when you end up jumping and hitting the ceiling, you'll end up falling through this big platform and end up falling down into like the enemies or potentially the spikes. Once you get past that area, there's a whole bunch of cannons firing some stuff, even more flies buzzing around. You can use them to kind of catapult your way over some of the bigger spike pits, though if you accidentally end up hitting them, you'll only take, of course, that 1 heart of damage. Right after that is the Mine Shaft, another one of those areas where you're going to be going downwards, watching out for rotating mace balls, as well as a few of the fly enemies all over the place during the course of this room. Still relatively straightforward, though a bit more challenging than the previous one we just did, because the flies kind of move around in a little bit of a sporadic pattern, especially with both types of them going at one time, so it can be a little bit difficult. When you make it here, you'll land on this rock platform, will fall, and you have to be very careful and jump to a chain to the left, and then go down a little bit more, and you'll find another door to enter into the big cavern. Not a whole lot to the big cavern, a couple of rocks that end up falling, but nothing too challenging. The next room starts off with a bunch of flies kind of moving around in a diamond-like pattern. Watch out for those and then jump into the water, watching out for some piranha that are going to try to chase you down. Wait for that right opportunity to pop out so you don't accidentally jump directly into one of those flies moving around. After those first couple areas that kind of change things up, these areas back to back really aren't too much of a threat. There are the volcanoes that will spew out lots of little rocks everywhere, but if you move quickly, you can actually outrun the volcanoes. In fact, you can even jump on the rocks that spew out, so they really aren't too much of a threat to you. This is the last room before the last riding vehicle segment before the boss. It's just kind of more of the same though, with cannons firing. You can bounce off of them, bounce off a few of the other enemies as you kind of just slowly get through, as we are almost done the adventure that is the Addams family here. And the next room is the gondola. Now, this is the end of the game pretty much here. You're going to ride along the gondola. You can also jump in the water and swim around if you want, but it's just kind of a little bit easier and safer to just stay in the boat and let it ride you across to the other shoreline here inside this cave system. There will be some flies and some other stuff trying to hit you, but for the most part, pretty easy to kind of just cruise your way on through. Right after we get done with the gondola, we go into the Addams Family vault, which you'll see is opened, and then you can go inside. Now you'll be in the treasury filled with all of the Addams Family fortune. In the NES version of the game, you actually had to have a certain amount of money to get through and actually go after the final boss and save Morticia, but thankfully that's not the case with this version. There's a little bit of extra money, you'll probably get some of your health back, and then when you enter the door at the end, it's time for the final boss fight against the nasty judge. Jump up and stand on the very corner and duck down. By doing this, you won't be able to get hit by the judge. Wait for him to land down on the platform below, and then jump on his head. Go to the opposite corner where he'll be jumping to next, in which case repeat the process by jumping on his head, trying to do your best to avoid the gavels that are raining down. Now every once in a while he'll kind of jump straight down and then right back up after doing one cycle. If you time it exactly correct, you can land on his head there too, but it takes a little bit of tricky time just because it's a very little window that you have in order to do so. If you also time the jumps correctly, you can actually land on his head multiple times before he's able to retreat back up top. But you're probably going to end up risking running into some of the gavels, so only do so if you have some extra health to spare. But for the most part, this is a pretty easy final boss, and once you're able to drain all the nasty judge's health, you can sit back and enjoy the ending to the Addams Family. So there you have it, the Addams Family for the Super Nintendo. While it's not the best platformer on the SNES, it's one of my favorites I like to go back to from time to time, and I've always liked the whole Addams Family show and the movie, especially the first movie. The sequels, not nearly as much, but especially the first Addams Family movie that had come out during the early 90s, and I actually really enjoyed the Addams Family cartoon that also aired around the same time. There was the follow-up to this game called Addams Family PUGSLEY'S Scavenger Hunt, which in the SNES version is vastly different than this one. However, the NES version is identical to this game as far as level design. PUGSLEY'S Scavenger Hunt, though, is actually based on the cartoon. And then there's the Addams Family Values game, which was, of course, based on the sequel film, but it's actually more of a top-down perspective. It's kind of like a pseudo-sequel to Fester's Quest and has Legend of Zelda elements to it, and actually is a really cool little game if you've never checked it out. After all the members of the staff end up going by, you have one last portrait with the end on it, and after this, you go back to the title screen and you can start the game all over again. But with that, guys, that's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a thumbs up or commenting down below. If you enjoyed this Play It Through for Addams Family, be sure to check out the NES version I did many years back. Or if you want something a little bit different, how about the 8 Eyes Castlevania conversion, taking one of my favorite games, 8 Eyes, and making it into a Castlevania game. I of course also need to thank all the members of my Patreon. Your guys' continued support allows me to keep making videos like the one you guys just watched. Thank you all so much. If you'd like to help out, just click that little Patreon button down below. Of course, you can click the little subscribe button, or you can just, well, go to another video. It's all cool. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for all that continued support, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.